Here we go. Welcome to Lambda School's Lambda School Prep Lesson 4. We're going to be talking about objects today. Yeah, it's fun stuff. Objects are one of the most commonly used data structures in JavaScript, probably the most commonly used one. And we're going to be using this. You'll be using objects everywhere. It's something that this is just one of the most widely used, most important foundational concepts within JavaScript. It's used everywhere. You use it in every library. You're using it in everything that you're building. Everything significant that's outside of just like a little playpen on a website you're going to be using lots and lots of objects. So objects and arrays. There's a lot that you can do and build and model with objects and arrays. So we're going to explore that today, explore the contrast between the two. Yeah, so again, this is pre-course work. This is stuff that our students are expected to know before they come in. They're expected to understand a little bit of ES6, understand a little bit of JavaScript. You're getting a pretty good foundation in this. Like this is covering just like a lot of the core concepts. There's definitely a lot more to cover, a lot more like advanced material, and then of course, learning the code is. It's kind of like I don't know, like being on a sports team. Like we teach you how to make a layup, or shoot the soccer ball. It takes a lot of practice. You're going to have to practice practice to learn how to do it with both hands. A lot of repetition, and both feet. Like those are the types of I feel like that's a pretty good analogy for what coding is like. Just the more that you practice it, the more that you actually implement and apply the things that you're learning, the better it will stick and the better you'll become. So it does, take a lot of practice. Does take a lot of time. So we're giving you an intro to these topics, and we fully expect you to be coming back and referencing these videos quite a bit, asking a lot of questions. Like there's no way that you're going to have this stuff just like mastered from watching these videos. It's, I'm going to show you how to make a layup, and, you're going to have to go and practice and get better at it. But it's not something that you can just watch and then be perfect at it. So just keep that in mind. This is, that's the nature of it. So let's dive in and do a screen share. Oh yeah, quick note too. For everyone who is interested, I know a significant portion of the people who are participating in this are interested in attending our upcoming courses. There's quite a few of you who are in our upcoming course that begins in October. But then there's some of you too that are considering maybe November or some of our later courses. We kick off a course every month, and so. If you are interested, for those of you that are able to complete all this pre-course work this week, if you aren't interested in October, it is getting really close. But if you do complete all of the work this week, we can guarantee you an interview the beginning of next week. And so we will give you an interview. And so if you are interested in getting in October, it's very much kind of last minute, but because we're doing this live course and because it's a little more hands-on, we would feel more comfortable accepting people that do complete 100% of the pre-course work. So the pre-course work has to be 100% complete, and that's a very hard rule. We do not budge on that. So anyway, so if there are some of you that are looking at the October course and you haven't already signed up, then if you can finish the pre-course work this weekend, then we'd love to have an interview with you early next week, and maybe we can slot you into our October class. Okay, so objects. Let me zoom this in because it's been pretty small the last couple times I've done this. Okay. All right, so again, we have different types of variables. So we still just use the const keyword, and we don't use any other special keywords like you would in another language. But we have a couple different, types of values we can store in our variables or these references. So I can say const x is equal to 5. Const bool is equal to true. Const array is equal to an array. Const str is equal to my string. I guess there's a couple different ones. Const null value is equal to null. So yeah, and then const undefined is equal to. I can't make a variable that's called undefined because that's a reserved keyword. So like if I tried to make a variable called const null instead of equal to null, it's not going to like that. Or const is equal to const, something like that. Like if I wanted to call my variable const, you can't do that because you're overriding a JavaScript keyword, and so that will throw an error. This is also, this one right here is this linter, this little yellow sign is saying, hey, you don't need to do this. And the reason it's saying that is because by default, all of your variables, if you don't assign them a value, the variable is going to be initialized to undefined. And so this one right here is kind of silly to set a const to undefined because you can't go in and change it. But so anyways, that's why it's saying that's weird. But like you would never do this. I'm just showing the different types of values you can set. So, so we have arrays. Arrays are a collection of different values. So const nums, generally you try to keep them to the, the same type of thing in the array. Strings. So we have a couple different, like, so arrays are collections of these just of values. So arrays are a collection. It's a collection of values stored under a variable name. That order is important. It's rigid in its ordering. You can go in and reorder it. There's methods that allow you to do that, but just in its default state, there is order to it, and it's indexed, so I can access the first item off of the 0 index, or the next item off of the 1 index or the 2 index. And let me make sure I'm in the questions channel. So cool. All right. So anyway, if you have questions, drop them inside the questions channel. All right. So arrays. So now we're going to talk about this other fundamental structure this value, or this data type that we use in JavaScript, and it's called an object. Okay, so with an object, we use curly braces. So you hold down the Shift key, like when you're making an array with the square brackets, you use the curly brackets. So the difference between an object and an array: an object uses key value pairs. So everything inside of an object, there is a key for every value that we store in here. So inside of the array, I could go 5 and 10 like that, and I can just put numbers in it. And here we have to have a key for it. So key of 5, and then or key. So this part on the left is called the key. The part on the right is called the value. This part on the left is also called the property. So there's also a property on the object, or the key on the object. Let's see. Someone's asking about, will I be going over the use of the for each method, or will that be for later? That will be tomorrow. Yeah, so we're not going to be. I'm not going to cover that one today. But that's a really important method that'll be good to go over. But yeah, we'll be going over that tomorrow. Or one of your first homework assignments at Lambda School, you're actually going to be rebuilding for each and map and reduce. You're going to be rebuilding those from scratch, so you can get a better understanding of functions and how that all works. But okay, so key value pairs. So that's the main difference here. So we have key value pairs. The keys have to be unique. So if I tried to do this, this would not work. This would override it. There can only be one X property on this object. There can only be one Y property in the object. Okay, so they are unique. The key, you don't have to write it in quotes, but it is a string. It is stored as a string on the object. So the key is a unique string, and then there's a value that is associated with it. And so it's a simple thing and a simple concept right here, but this leads to some incredibly powerful concepts and ideas that that we can explore later on. But at its most basic level, this is the essence of what an object is. It is their key value pairs. The keys are unique, and the cool thing about it is if we know the key of the value that we want, then we can just go in and grab it right off the object. So there's a couple different ways that we can there's a couple different ways that we can access these values on the object. So one is dot notation, which is actually what's going on right here. Console is an object, and then I'm going dot log, and this is calling the log method that is attached to the globally available console object. What we're going to do here is I'm going to say object.x. Then we run that, and we see a 5 is printed out in the console. So obj.x, so dot notation. So this allows us to be able let's see. So this the dot notation gives us a way to be able to access one of the keys off of the object. So I change that to y. Run that, we see 10 prints out. Okay, so there is dot notation, and there is also bracket notation, what we call bracket notation. So with bracket notation, because if you remember, x and y are both stored as strings, even though when I'm declaring an object like this, I don't actually have to write them in quotes. So I don't have to write them in quotes like that. You can, and it works that way, but just as convenience, it's going to assume that the item to the left of the colon is going to be a string by default. Let's see, I see Mark Oliver's asking, at the submit pre-course, there's still no way to submit web assignments 5 through 8. Okay, I'll look into that and make sure that we make sure that's cleared up. So we're going through a bit of a redesign of our site right now. We have some designers and some developers working on a new version of it. It's going to be deployed pretty soon. So there are some changes coming up. So it's going to be a little bit different now, the way that we handle pre-coursework submissions and the way that it's going to be handled going forward. So we will we'll be announcing some ways that we can check it out, because we're moving everything to Replit, and that's going to change the way that we do submissions. We used to do all these assignments used to be up on GitHub. Now they're on Replit. But anyway, we can talk more about the nuts and bolts of that later. Would you ever use numbers for key names? Yes, actually. And an array, so if I blow your mind, but an array is actually an object. It's actually created using an object, and the key is the number, like the index. So it's kind of like 0 is the index for that, and 1 is the index for this. And so I don't want to confuse anyone with that, but in JavaScript, arrays are actually made using objects under the hood. Same with like functions and strings and numbers. Like they're all actually made using objects and to some degree. So yeah, so you can conceptually think of an array actually as having key value pairs, where the index is a number, but the index can only be a number. So. But anyway, that's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down right now too deep. That's a little more than we need to do right now. So okay, so second way to access a value off of a property. So we can use dot notation. We can also use bracket notation, and then I can pass in a string here. So object, and I can pass in the string y. If I print that out, we see 10 and 10 are all printed out. And so this is another way to access the key off of it. Just use the dot notation unless you can't. And there's a couple instances where you can't use dot notation. So if one of the keys actually was like, if they were numbers, 0 and 1, you actually can't go object.0. That's illegal. And so this will actually throw an error, and that won't run. And so we have to use bracket notation. So the 0 is actually stored as a string, and anything we put in here will be converted into a string when it goes to look for a key on the object. But this is getting a little bit into the nitty gritty and the nuances of the syntax. Just general rule of thumb, just use dot notation unless you can't. Another instance is, and this will come up in your homework if you have a variable. So object, I'll just call this key. So if I have a variable key that's set to the string y, and I want to access the property y off this variable, I can access it like this. And so key is a variable that refers to the string y, and this right here is the same as saying object dot y. So these two sections are equivalent. You might think, well, what? This is kind of dumb. 9 to 10. Why would I write it like that instead of like this? And so this is not that you would never be declaring a variable like this and then using it to access the property like the next line down. This would be if maybe this is the variable is some type of the value of the variable is some type of user input, or it's an argument that's coming in the function that you're in. So realistically, maybe this key is getting defined, somewhere else. And then, later on down here, you know that the key is going to be a string for the property that we need to access, but you're not necessarily controlling how it's getting set or whatever. That's generally the use case there. But this is more just, so don't get too caught up on this, but pretty much just default to dot notation unless you can't. And one of the instances where you can't is if you have a variable and you need to use the value of the variable as the key name, or if you have like a number. Those are like the two main instances where you would need to use bracket notation. So, but otherwise, just use dot notation. Okay, so this object that we're creating right here, x5, y10. Let's change this into something a little more real. So objects are used to model real-world things or anything inside of your application. So I was a back-end developer for a long time. So I worked on like servers and databases and stuff like that. And we would have objects for our users. And so we would have a database that would save all the user information to the hard drive. And then when our program is running, we would get that information and turn it into a JavaScript object so our programs could use it. And that's how we would represent these users. We would represent them as objects inside of our program. We had hundreds of other different types of things that we'd represent. I worked for a health fitness company we had software that's on all the major health equipment, like exercise equipment brands. So like Nordic Track and Proform and Gold's Gym and all those different companies. So we had software that ran on all those different pieces of equipment. And so we had objects that represented the equipment. We had an object that represented the like the workout that the user ran, an object for the user. We would have objects just for so many different things. And so the object is kind of the basic way to represent some key piece of some grouping of information, some grouping of different values to represent a cohesive unit of information. So if we have a user as an example, and this is a kind of a classic first example with an object, we'd have something like maybe we have an email property. So we would do something like contact at lambdaschool.com or something like that. So like email to Ben. All right. So Ben at lambdaschool.com. All right. And then now let's do password, and then the password would be, whatever. And normally this would be hashed. This would be something that would be, we'd save this in a way that's indecipherable, but that's something that we discuss and go into later. But just for our example now, this is fine. So I have maybe email, password, like admin, set to true. I'm an admin user. Then there could be information about like payroll, and here's our pay stubs or something like that. You could have information like, let's see, payment start date, and this would be a new a new date object. So date is another thing that it's just kind of creates like a timestamp for the moment, and you can work with time, and that's something that we talk about more later. But we'll just say like moment start date. Obviously, this is not precise, but usually you'd have like a specific date format. But so you would do something like this. You would have these different types of values, and with this object, we can better represent a user. And so, because with just a string, we can't capture all the information that we would want to group together for a user. The same with an array, or a Boolean value. Obviously, like we need to have these different pieces of information grouped together under a single variable name, or under a single value that we can be able to access and be able to reference. And so this is how we use objects. Objects are a grouping of these related key value pairs. So this right here, yeah, this is what a user would look like. And so let's say I got paid, so we'll go user.stubs.push, and we'll add in an object. All right, we'll say amount will be $5, and date now, holdings, whatever. And so we'd maybe have another object that would have information about like the tax withholdings or whatever. So and so you'd have these key value pairs, and you can have nested objects. You can have objects inside of objects. You can have arrays inside of objects. One of the most common organizations in JavaScript, like with like data organization, is you'll have an array of objects. So an array of objects is an incredibly common way to be transferring data around. So like the array of comments would be or array of objects. Like if you think of Twitter and you have like your feed, or Facebook, there's like your feed going down, and you have these little blocks of stuff going down the page, but like there's like a picture, and there's the number of likes and comments, and essentially what they're using is they have a template, and then they have an array of objects that they're given from a server, and then they take those objects and they map them into those HTML and CSS templates, and that's how they represent your feed. And then let's say you go into comment, and you can see the list of comments on a post or something. Each one of those comments would be an array of objects. Your shopping cart on Amazon, all the different items in your shopping cart would be an array of objects. Each item in your shopping cart would be an object. So it's an incredibly common way of structuring your data. So learning how to be able to iterate over an array of objects and access the information in them, and that's a very core and important skill to develop with programming and JavaScript in particular. So let's I'm just checking my notes real quick. Okay, so let's create an array of objects. So what we'll do is we'll say const these. Okay, so we're going to have a bunch of puppy objects in here. Okay, so we're going to have 3 puppy objects. And there's some different ways you can kind of speed up and make it easier to create objects. It's things called constructor functions, can make it easier, but it's something that we talk about more in the beginning of our course that I don't want to get into as much yet, but that's another key aspect to objects. So right in here, let's say with these puppies, we'll give them name. So I have Fido, name, Santa's little helper, and we'll give this one a name, Foofy. Okay. So this is how you escape a quote mark. So then as the code is being read, it doesn't interpret it as a quote mark, so it doesn't close the string. So right here we have name Fido, name Santa's little helper, name Foofy. So now let's, we're going to print out the names of these on those objects. So there's 3 objects inside of the array. So first thing, let's do console.log puppies. If we run that, we can see it's kind of garbled on the side, but we see it's an array of 3 objects. If I do puppies 0 at index 0, it just prints out the one object of the Fido, Fido, and 1 for Santa's little helper. Okay. So if I do 0 right here, so puppies bracket 0, this gets the first one. I can then go .name off of that. And we'll see Fido. It's printed out just the name. If I change this to Santa's little helper, we get Santa's little helper just like that. So now let's do this. Let's do for let I get 0, I less than use that length I plus plus. All right, so again, this is how we structure a for loop. So I starts at 0, and then we go up until the length or the count of the array. So 3, 0 to 3. As soon as I is 3, it breaks and stops. All right, so then now let's do console.log. Let's say puppies at index I, .name. Run that out, Fido, Santa's little helper, and Foofy. Okay, so those all print out. Let's see. Okay, so John asked a question. Sorry, this was about 10 minutes ago. Is the arrow notation valid in JavaScript for objects, or do you only use? So the arrow brackets, or the fat arrow, you can use that with methods that you define on objects, which is actually the next thing I'm going to be talking about. So, all right, so iteration over an array of objects. This right here is one of the most common things that you're going to be doing in JavaScript, just iterating over an array of objects. And we'll teach you some different ways to do this and ways to do it better, but this right here is super, super, super common. Just for loop over an array of objects. You're doing this all the time. Okay. All right, so now let's cat. Let's make another object. We'll call this snowball 2. All right, so we have just that object with a name on it. So if we do console.log cat.name, it goes up, grabs the cat object, and we go .name. So it grabs the key off of the object. So we run that, snowball2 prints it out. So bonus points to anyone who knows where snowball2 and Santa's little helper are from. Okay. All right, so now here, let's add, oh yeah, so we've talked about how we can add strings, we can add numbers, we can add Boolean values, arrays, other objects nested inside of it. So now I want to talk about functions. We can attach functions to our objects. And so just like we can attach all these other values, we can write a function and attach it to the object. We haven't talked as much about functions. That's something that we'll be getting into in more in-depth tomorrow. But essentially, a function is a block of it's a piece of code that you are executing under a name. It's like a lines of logic that all get grouped under a variable name. So arrays, it's like a bunch of different values. An object is a bunch of key value pairs. A function is kind of like a variable name that's for like a block of code that will run when you use that variable name. So instead of here, I'm just going to say console.log hi. And then now this meow right here, it's a block of code that will run whenever I invoke this method. And so the way that I invoke this method, so a function on an object, we call it a method. And so, so if I do cat dot meow, open close parenthesis, and if I run this, we're going to see hi, or it should be meow. Okay. So meow prints out. So cat dot meow prints out the text meow with the exclamation mark. So this is a so it's a piece of so the function is a piece of logic. It's a piece of it's a just lines of code. It can be as many lines long as you want it to be. Generally, we keep them pretty short, but just theoretically, there's not really much of a limit to it. But it's a set of instructions, a set of a block of code that you can associate under a variable name, and then we can run that code later. So here we say, all right, meow, and it's going to run all the code that's in here. And then we'll go back and run it all. So when I do cat.meow, it's going to jump back up, grab the meow method off of the object, and it's going to run it. So something interesting we can do inside of this object, we can reference the object that this method is attached to. So this function. So let's say that inside of the function, we needed to know the age, and we needed to know the name of the cat, and if it's alive. Like we need to be able to reference these properties from inside of the function. Right now, you might be thinking, okay, we can reference the cat variable. But if this was just inside of an array, if this object was inside of an array like this, we wouldn't be able to use that. We could do cats at 0, but it's something where we can't hard code this in because the context can change, and if it's passed into another function, etc. So something where the context can change, and so we don't want to actually we don't want to actually reference this variable for where it's defined. We have a special keyword that's available to us that lets us access this object that the method's on. That keyword is called this. So there's some a couple like little tricks to it, but we'll talk about that more later. Just in its most basic usage right now is when you have a function as the value on an object. This will be a reference. Will refer to the object that the function is attached to. So if I do console.log this.name, and then so cats is it's now inside of an array. So I'm going to do cats at index 0 dot meow. So there's only one object inside of the array. But I'm going to reference that first object out of the array, and then I'm going to call .meow on it. And we see snowball2 is printed out because this .name refers to the object that the method is attached to. This .name. So there's a couple things with like you can set it and you can change it, and there's some nuances to it that. But don't worry about that right now. Just its most basic usage, and this is right 90% of the time, is it's just going to refer to the object that this will refer to the object that the function is attached to. So now for meow, I can say this dot name meowed. And then we see snowball2 meowed printed out. Okay, so this is, so objects, accessing objects out of arrays, like this line right here, line 10, this could be kind of tricky to you. I'm not seeing a lot of questions, and so usually that's a sign that people's eyes are glazing over. So ask any questions if you have them, but this is something that, it's just going to take some practice. Objects are kind of tricky. This is introducing a much different concept that's going to whole different area, from arrays. I think that we're reaching a little more difficult of a level. And then when we get into functions will be a little trickier as well. But it's just a matter of practice and time, and all these things will be easy in time. And so, just an important thing to remember is there's no stupid questions. Some questions might be kind of stupid, but you should ask them. Always ask your questions. There, any question that you can ask that's like super basic, simple, even if it's something that I've repeated 15 times in this lecture, like still ask it, because it's something that like you don't know that information. You need that information, and maybe you missed it. I know a lot of people will often feel bad about asking a question because they're like, oh, he already talked about that, or he already covered it. Like, don't worry about that. It's fine if it's not sticking. It's hard to remember stuff through like just hearing it. And so the nice thing is I can code in front of you, do live coding, and so this helps it be a little bit more visual. But just ask other questions. Let's see. Not glazed. No, not glazed. All right, glad to hear it. Can you embed a function that's defined elsewhere in your code? Yeah, so I could do, I say const meow is equal to, well, I'll just copy it out. So I could define this function up here, meow. Well, that's actually, there's a couple different ways you can define functions, but we'll talk about that more later. And so I can attach meow, I can attach it onto this object like this. And this is really common to do as well, where you have a function or some other variable. So const age is equal to 5. And then I can say age like that, and I'll attach it. And so that's very common as well. We won't be talking about the prototype tonight. Let's see, Mac over Windows. Macs are expensive, but they work really well. They're really consistent. They're very consistent across Macs. PCs are always rough in our class because everyone has a different PC and they're all different ages, and there's always like crazy bugs trying to get people to getting all their environments synced up and set. So anyway, I prefer Macs. They are expensive, but I do feel it's worth it, but it's hard. It's something where your company will pay for a computer someday. And that's at that point it might be easier to transition into a Mac, because I realize that there can be a price issue there. So are there situations in which you have to call a method inside an object in an array inside another object? So how would you do that? I'll have to break that down. I'll break that down in a moment. I'm going to kind of keep going with this example a little bit. So this is more just kind of me, like the basic principle here is that we have key value pairs. And I'm just kind of breaking down some different aspects of the syntax specifically. So another little ES6 shortcut, so this is an ES6 thing, is you can actually, so instead of needing to do age, where I'm setting a key age and then I'm taking the variable age and setting that as the value, I can just do this, and it will set a key of age and the value of 5 on the object inside of the cats array. I'm gonna actually get rid of this and make this cat. Cat.meow like that. And then meow gets attached. If I run this, we still see Snowball 2 meowed. Okay. All right, and then this is the thing that was covered in the, this is a string template. This was covered in the first lesson. Let's see, I'm gonna make sure I'm covering everything. Okay, so are there situations where you have to call a method on an object in an array instead of another object? So um, how to do that? Okay, so let's say we have an object. We'll say this is a user object. All right, and then we'll say that the user has a name, Stephanie, and we'll say like posts, an array of posts. Like something on Facebook or Twitter or something like that. And then we'll, instead of here, we'll have we'll have a couple different, 2 objects on it. So these objects inside of the array, objects inside of an array, each one of the objects should have the same format. That's a guideline when you're coding. So the objects that you put in an array should all have the same format. They should be the same. They should be representing the same thing. So maybe we have a title, my post title, content, so that they have a function on it. So let's say, or we'll say likes and set to 0, and then we'll say like post. Say this dot likes plus. Right. So we're going to increment the likes on that object. So this function right here, the this keyword is going to refer to this object right here that's all highlighted. That's what this keyword right there will refer to in that context. It will not refer to the user object. It's going to refer to this post object. And then, we can copy all this down here and same kind of thing. Okay. So here's a user with an array of objects, and those objects can have methods associated with them. And there's a thing called the prototype that allows us to pull these methods out to where these objects can still use them, but we don't have to duplicate them across. And there's some stuff like that that's going on. But on this user object, so the way that we could do that, you could say like something like this is kind of run out of room, but so I could say const. What will often happen is you'll have something like const post is equal to user.posts 0 like that. And then, so we're creating a variable reference to this nested object. And then we'll go post dot like post. And then we'll say console.log post. If we run that, the post prints out, we see that likes is now 1 after doing the like post. This is a common type of a use case. You could also just call it directly on it. So user.posts 0.like post. And you can see it kind of drills down in. Let's see. Oh, wait, post. Oh, yeah. So if we run that, we see that it liked it. So the likes was increased by 1. So this is this right here is not too far of a stretch from like how things will actually be, constructed in your program. But you can see how we kind of drill down in. So we start on the left, like with user, the top level, and then we access the posts property on it, which is an array. And so with arrays, we can use the bracket syntax with the index to be able to access items in the array. So we access the first item in the array at index 0. And then this right here all evaluates to that object that's at index 0. And then we call the like post method on that object. And so we could go as deep as we needed to go here. You could write it out as deep as you wanted. There could be 20 nested objects, and we could just have a bunch of dots and go as deep as we'd like. Let's see. What is a thing before the $sign? You guys were talking about that. It's called a backtick. Well, it's not, the example's not up here anymore, but so yeah. So if I were to do like .log backtick, and then inside of here you can write JavaScript. So like 5. Oops. I do like 5 plus 5. 10. And that will be evaluated, or you can put a variable name in there. So run it, you can see 10 equals 10. So they're backticks. Use it for string templates, and use this $, opening curly brace, closing curly brace, and then you can write JavaScript in there, and it will be injected into the middle of the string or wherever in the string you want it to be. So this is, this is a new ES6 feature, and it's super awesome. Let's see, sitting in a leather chair. You know, I'm not sure if this is real leather or synthetic. Let's see, if you have different items in the cats array, what would this refer to? Oh, let's get the start answers already. Okay. Figured out by Mac once I get a job just for work and be done with it. Oh. Yeah, usually you're like, it's helpful if your company can pay for it. So can use this outside an object. So this, I'm gonna simplify this, get rid of this example now. So let's say, so we'll have, go back to our user example. And we'll say, check password. All right, and so like, let's say in here, we wanted to check to see if potential password is equal to the password here. We could say, well, we could just do return potential password equals the stop password. So this right here, this expression will be evaluated into a true or false, and then it will return true or false. And so, this used inside of this function, again, will refer to this object. We're going to talk about arrow functions tomorrow. Arrow functions are another type of function, and it breaks this binding, and so you have to use the function keyword. But again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Don't worry about it too much right now. This, if we were to use it outside, we were to use it right here, this would refer to the window object, which is like this big giant object that's for everything that's going on. And so this will refer to that. So otherwise, it's like if this is outside of that context, it refers to the window object. This right here is a reference to user. There's also some ways you can explicitly bind it, where you can change this context and stuff like that. But that's something we talk about more in the course. So you can use bind, call, and apply, or some different function methods where you can set this context. But yeah, so this is used inside of functions. You use it inside of functions, and you use it to reference the object that the method that the function is attached to. So that's what it's intended for. Okay, it's hard to know what questions to ask without knowing what the homework is. Yeah, so like there's a lot of like specific questions. Like, so if you have more general questions about the topics right now, those are good questions to ask. But yeah, there will be, you'll have a lot more specific questions once I release your homework in a few minutes. Let's see, how can you validate items that you don't necessarily know exist, like accessing a database you can't see the structure of? So there's a lot of foundational knowledge required to be able to really help you have a total understanding of the question that you asked. Generally, let's sketch real quick. So generally, the way the internet works is you have a client, which can be like a web browser, like those on the computer. Here it is on the phone. And here is your Internet of Things microwave. Okay, and through Wi-Fi, they all communicate over the internet. with this computer sitting in a data center. It doesn't have a monitor. It's just a big box that has a whole bunch of hard drives. And in reality, there's a whole bunch of these all connected together, and one's going to have a ton of RAM on it. One's going to have a ton of hard drives on it and storage space. And there's a, you can spend months learning about how to build a successful data center and architect your backend. But this is just, simplification. There's a server that's running, and a server is a bunch of code that is running in memory on RAM that is listening, and it processes these requests that come in over the internet, and then it will communicate with a database. And this is a little bit of this is a super rough drawing, but this is generally how databases are kind of recommended. It's like a bunch of rings, but and so the server is going to talk to the database. The database is your hard drive. So if the power turns off, stuff is saved onto the hard drive. And so the server communicates back and forth with the database, and then the server will respond back to all the clients. And so the information that the database is saving. So if you think like Facebook, when you go and someone's post on Facebook, so you push the like button, you're gonna send a message to the Facebook server saying, hey, user X liked user Y's photo. And so then their server is going to go look at the data that's stored in the database, and it's going to say, all right, find user X's record, and then indicate that they liked user Y's post, and modify both of those records to reflect that. And so then the server goes in and changes that in the database, and then the database says, all right, it's updated. The server sends a message back and says, hey, it's all updated, good to go. So that's what happens every single time you click on something in Facebook or Twitter or Amazon, just any web page. When you click on something and sign up, there's this interaction going on between your computer, a server, and then a database. And so often on the server is just if it's a node server, there's a whole bunch of JavaScript code that's running, and the objects are going to be in-memory representations of information that is stored on the hard drive. And so there's going to be some code here that's going to help you. You're going to take information stored on the hard drive, and then it will be turned into JavaScript objects that you can manipulate and work with on the server. And you can send those objects back to the client, or you can modify them and then resave them into the database. But that's kind of the general flow, general idea. And this is just some fun, just kind of general high level distributed system architecture knowledge. It's kind of fun to get into. But yeah, this is the basics of full stack development. Front end developers generally are over here. Mobile developers are right here. Back end developers are doing all of this part. If you're an electrical engineer, hardware or something, working on autocalls, you might probably be over here actually, working on the different pieces for these different devices and how they connect and how they do all this stuff. So, yep, yeah, drawing tablet makes it nice. Doing this with a trackpad is not look very pretty. Okay, so this kind of in a nutshell, it's hard to really dive into the nitty-gritty of that question without a lot more foundational knowledge. But these are just good things in general to understand, and so that's why I felt like it was good to take a minute to talk about. Okay, so in our course, we start with front-end development, move into back-end development, and then we start going very deep, specifically within just computers in general, just how they work and operate, and computer architecture and lower level languages. So we start high level, have you building stuff, building you practical things, and then we move deeper to give you that more foundational knowledge to where you can move into just other types of application development. So and this diagram, this holds true with like video games and a lot of other types of applications, not just websites. So if you're playing a video game, you have a server, database, and the server is facilitating communication between all the different clients. If you're playing a video game, like a multiplayer game, there's a bunch of different computers, and you're all connected to a server, which is a box and a data center. And then the server is telling all the computers in real time where like what your coordinates are like. So as you're running around and moving, and so all the computers can stay in sync, which is pretty incredible. And then the game finishes, and you have your stats. All those like user stats are saved into the database, and then retrieved on subsequent logins. And, anyway, it's pretty fascinating stuff how they can do that. All right. Let's see. You define the cat arg variable outside of the object. Can you go over that again, please? Yeah. So say const email is equal to my email at main.com. And then I can just do email. So the email on the left is a string for the key. This email on the right is a reference to this variable on line 1. And so it's going to go up, grab this variable, grab this string, go down, and it's going to stick this string that's highlighted right where email is, that's now highlighted on line 4. So again, ES6 shortcut syntax is you can write it like this. Okay. So if you know all the stuff around, like when you're kind of writing out your object, this is how you write it. You can add properties to objects. So I could say like user dot is admin and set it equal to true. And is admin doesn't exist on the user object at this point, but when I do this right here, it adds it. So now if I do console.log user, print it out, we see there's now an is admin property. So I can add this is admin property onto the object. I could also do user dot let's see, so name. I could Ben, something like that. So I could use this is the bracket notation again, just showing you that you can do this to add properties onto the object. Just use dot notation unless you can't. And most of the time you can just use a dot notation. So if you ever get into a situation where it's causing you issues, bracket notation might be what you need to do. Okay. All right. Need to. Oh, he said need to get you a tablet. So I actually was writing that with the tablet. So yeah, it speaks to my excellent drawing ability. So you can ask why this doesn't work, or is that not going to be covered today? 7. Let's see. It's well, you're using an equal sign. You should be using a colon, unless you're defining 7 as its own like variable. So we'll talk about arrow functions tomorrow. But okay. All right. All right. Let's see. Real quick, your question just about the 7 thing. I'll just answer that real quick. So actually, I have my replit right here. So that's how you would write it. So you need to use a you have to use a keyword here for defining the variable, but we'll talk about arrow functions more tomorrow. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Your homework will be deployed in just a moment. Yeah. So we'll get into the details of this tomorrow. It's doing an implicit return, but we'll talk about that more tomorrow. All right. Thanks, guys. I will. Your homework will be deployed shortly.